Good. I finally got through.
Yes, you did.
A little bit of trouble, but I
Huh.
I just upgraded the Zoom to
Oh,
a higher, more recent, application. So it seems to have a little more trouble getting in till it
huh.
gets adjusted.
Okay. All right.
How have you been, Kathryn?
Well, I've been good. I've been good. I'm not fulfilling all my agreements, but I decided to do a Facebook post every week on regenerative leadership. So I made the promise to everybody that on Thursday at 2 o'clock, I would be posting a video, which I can make anytime and put up. But I didn't do it, so I've got to do that after we're done. I'm not in the rhythm yet.
Well, maybe we can drum up some inspiration for you.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, I'm finding the leadership, the regenerative leadership seems to have a little bit of traction, so we'll see where it goes. But I was on a call this morning with a woman that I've been watching her for a while now, and she's a ball of fire. She does amazing things. She's been working with the incarceration system on the west side of the state, and actually ran for sheriff, which is kind of what got her into it. She started to see all the corruption and the manipulation and all that kind of stuff. So she learned a ton. She didn't win, but she learned a ton. And so she's been working in that space for a number of years. And suddenly what I'm saying is resonating with her in a way that it hasn't before. So she's very interested in doing something, partnering in some way. So we're still figuring that out, but so it will be very interesting to see where we go with all that. And she's just started a mighty network of her own. So I spent 2 hours this morning tutoring her how to set it up, helping her understand the structure so she knew what she was doing a little more. But she's got a whole group of people around her who are doing stuff. So that should not take her too long. So what's new at you?
Oh, lots of things. I never know where to start.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, the first things first, I sent my wife off this morning to the airport.
Oh.
She's headed out to see her nephew and family, his family. And we just got back. So, so I've been very, yes, yesterday afternoon, and of course our cat, I mean, she's been well taken care of, but there's a hole in her life, when we leave.
Right.
I've been feeling that and sensing that. And because of course, this morning when I got back from, the minute I rolled out my wife's new suitcase, the cat just starts getting agitated.
Yeah.
She knows what that means. She's 16 years old. She's seen it for years.
Oh.
And so when I got back, she was just sitting by the front window, just, crying.
Mm.
Basically all you could say, just crying. And even continuing on a little bit, sort of sobbing, catching herself as I pet her, and then finally she just gave into that. And she seems to be fine now. But I started thinking about that in terms of what we ended with last week, which is our notion of economy.
Yep. We're going to talk about economy.
And, our notion of, well, basically our economy defines the interworkings of our world. And for her, Terry and I, my cat, Terry and I are very, very important aspects of that. And there's a breach in that, you know, that world that she feels secure in, and well, what's important to her. And I started thinking of a larger picture, you know, there are many breaches in our world right now. That unfortunate town in Maui is one.
Yeah.
But there are so many that aren't being reported. Yeah. I mean, you know, the capital city of Northwest Territories in Canada has had to be, you know, completely evacuated this morning or last night or whatever. The fires are descending on it. And it's not just fires, it's a hard category 3 expected to go for hurricane, you know, expected
in California.
Zip right up the central Californian valley. Of course, it won't be that strong in terms of winds, but it'll bring devastating rains. And this is the dry season, so everything's hard as a rock. You know, it's just, and so where do we stand in that? I mean, humanity. And I'm preaching to someone who knows more than I do about this, so I'm not going to delve into it deeply, other than to say we mean a lot. We mean everything. And to the extent that we sit around and quibble about, oh, should we go electric or, you know, hybrid or keep using gasoline motors, it doesn't matter one bit. In terms of the world economy, it doesn't matter. Creatures, ecosystems, the entire strata of life are falling away as we speak right now, are in desperate straits. Why? Because human beings only care about themselves.
Yeah.
And, you know, my cat can get over it. The world can't get over it. You know, the larger world can't get over this much longer.
Yeah, it will get over it, but it will get over it in a way that excludes us because we are not participating.
Well, and many, many species will disappear.
That's right.
So in that case, they're not going to get over it either. So, you know, it just started to really signal to me the importance to be alert to who and what we are.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And what really matters.
Yeah, that really matters. And that maybe, just maybe, when the Bible starts out with the statement that God gave human beings dominion over the earth, that this was a communication that was meant. It carried some gravity.
Yeah.
But of course, you don't define dominion in terms of yourself and your desires.
And I wonder what the real word was, because it got translated at dominion, but I'll bet it wasn't. I used to serendipitously, my daughter and I, when we left the ashram, moved in with this lady and her daughter, and her husband was a translator from the original Aramaic for the Bible.
Wow.
So I didn't get a whole lot because it wasn't her, it was her husband, and they were split. So, but she was able to share a few things with me, and it really sensitized me to the issues in translation and how people who translate from their own understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So they can only figure out words that make sense to them. And if they don't have a huge understanding, it's narrow. Yeah. So.
And yet, now, in spite of what I just said, you know, Terry and I are very aware of the needs that our cat has and that our garden has, and, you know, and very forthcoming to to provide for those needs. And you in particular have introduced me to so many different people who are gathering together in various organizations, who carry that concern into specific focal areas, I mean, because nobody can do it all.
Right.
We're not supposed to. We're all different for a reason, we do.
Yes, yes.
That's fine. That's cool. So this gives me immense hope. Nothing in the mass, prognostications and and activity. Nothing else does. It's sort of organized activities. They are all seemingly done for the sake of the extremely self-centered sense of economy. How the world works. So it's very important work that you're doing and that I'm doing in my own way, but to shift this sense of where we owe our allegiance.
Yeah, very good. That's exactly, yeah. Yep.
I mean, I love my wife. I love all of you that I spend time with, but my allegiance is to, this field of work that is so important. And, that this all came up because a friend of mine sent me a paper, a link to a paper. And she and I are, share on very, very similar, platform or ground, except for one thing. She's been intrigued by this whole thing about climate change and how it's, been formed as a solid, undeniable theory, and she doesn't believe that. So she was sending me a paper by a couple of physicists, William Happer and Richard Lindzen. And I won't bother you with their politics. They are a little bit of right-wing heritage association, that sort of thing. But I read carefully and realized what was happening in the paper was they were picking points that are so peripheral. They're scattering out the edges of what's really important. Legitimate. I mean, yes, we should consider, the input this year of the volcano last year, and cloud formations have been changing and abrupt, and we're in very unexpected ways. And yes, back in the early 30s, there was a heat anomaly that is totally not understood. And often, people just gloss over it, but it was horrendous and remarkably, so yes, we can go dwell on that, or we can simply say, none of this really matters, because what's really at play here is that mankind is totally out of place. So I wrote back my friend just saying, thanks for the article. And, it's interesting to know about these new, evidently the fuels that are used to power major, the huge shipping.
Shipping has really been doing some interesting experiments.
Has been completely changed. And this has actually, in terms of the charts of aerosols that are emitted into the air, across the shipping lanes, particularly Europe to the United States, and then United States to the Far East. There's been remarkable changes. So this is good news. I don't deny that. And I'm not going to change my focus.
Well, the thing, and I think it's the label climate change And even talking about global warming is better. The climate change moniker came from a Republican who felt threatened by global warming and felt that it was not as threatening to talk about climate change. And it caught on. But it totally does not deal with the species diversity loss. People don't really understand how that matters at all. It's just so somebody who used to live here doesn't live here anymore. Big deal. They just don't get that the planet is managed by all of us. And all of us have a piece of managing that planet. And when parts of that are not there, the planet is managed differently. And that's what's happening. And that's part of it. So the carbon is, yes, important, but it's not the whole story. And when they talk about the melting Arctic and all of that, all they can talk about is the rising sea level. Oh yeah, that's going to happen and that's important, but it's really not what's important. What's important is the changing of the cycles of the warming waters, which are going to which change the weather. I mean, those are the things that are really going to make the difference. And if we lose the ability to cool the way we have, which we are, then it's all up for grabs. It's all going to be very different. And we passed the point where we can do anything about that. So it's adjusting to that and then figuring out how to keep cooling happening on the planet. And we don't understand how that happens. So that's been part of why I have the approach I have, is because cooling is really going to be the key immediate issue that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
We have to.
Critters can move fast enough to stay ahead of the heat.
But the plants can't. And without the plants, we won't have critters.
And very few of the critters can move fast enough.
Yeah.
I mean, birds can't necessarily move because they have to move with their food.
Yes, they're all tied together. That's right. Yeah.
It's not something they can just pick, so there's a tie-in here that blew my mind. Years ago, I was designing a house for a doctor. And one day he shared with me that both or all of his children, I don't know whether it's two or more, had bad asthma. And I said, oh, well, let me talk to you about, volatile, particles that are released by products, and how we can we can choose our materials, and I started laying it out, in terms of, even in terms of how, excuse me, the way you use windows and design of open floor areas to the upstairs, create circulation and, keep a constant circulation moving out through the ceiling. I mean, I had it all laid out for him. Just looked at me and he said, well, that's really not necessary. They're all on drugs. The asthma is very well, contained. And it's like pinprick deflation is like, oh, okay.
Yeah, well, that's,
People have that same attitude.
They do. Yes, exactly.
Who cares if the micro world, microme, all dies out?
Right.
We have chemicals that do all that. No, we don't.
Yeah.
At least not the same and not adequately.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So you can't even start talking about an economy for the whole planet without recognizing what's at the center of it, which is the fact that humankind has been this plague of locusts that's just swept over the land.
I don't know. I mean, it certainly can be framed that way. I feel it's more like our teenage years where we were just like discovered our power and played with it. All these things we can do because we can do. And now we're getting into maturity where we're seeing the impacts of our actions. And so you have to adjust your actions. I mean, that's what we do as adults, right? It's not that you can't run your car at 125 miles an hour down the street. You still can do that. But you have learned that it's probably not wise for a number of reasons, and that you don't have to do that. It's something you can do, but you don't have to do that to prove something. Knowing that you can do it is sufficient. That's part of maturity. You don't have to act out on all the things that are possible.
Talking about behaviors, and I'm talking about economy. And our economy is based on consumerism. In other words, that's what locusts do. They consume.
Yeah.
They're at a stage in their lives where
Right.
that's what's all important, is to consume. And so,
Right.
yes, in that sense, we are at a stage in our lives. It's important. We've made it important to consume everything.
Yeah, and we don't have to do that. You know, and the drive to mass produce, to make sure that everybody has the same thing, that came out of that whole consumerism thing. There's something very rich about what is special to localities. You know, there's in small towns, there's people who do special things that you can't get anywhere else. You know, there's a small shop where they're making their living doing whatever they love to do. And it's totally unique to them. And there was a time when we used to really appreciate those. And then we wanted this convenience. So, well, yeah, but when I'm in St. Paul, I want the same thing that I got when I was in California. You know, I want the same stores there. I don't want to have to worry about that. And so we went for this homogenized, and then we looked at that and said, yuck, everything's the same. I kind of miss that difference. And I think we're coming back to the locality and seeing economy in a different kind of way, because we've seen it as this very big picture instead of a lot of little pictures that are interlinked. And I think it's the little picture place that gives us the vibrancy and the excitement for life, because that's where we have agency. It's where we can interact, where we really can see the uniqueness that we all are, because we're all there and present to one another. And that kind of gets lost when there's thousands and millions of us. That we're coming back to that. And I'm really curious to see how much of the connections will remain, because we've really valued those connections. That's been a life, a species long dream. I do believe that's why the internet exists, because that was one answer to that. We really want to be connected to each other. We really want to be able to do that. And we're also seeing the limitations of that. So I'm very curious to see whether we're going to be able to hang on to that technology in some way, because it has been very valuable to us, and still not feel this homogenized other that we've also created on top of that. Can we have this distributed uniqueness connected in some way? And
Yeah.
what would that look like?
So 6 of us went down to Florida, you know, North Florida, the Panhandle, last weekend through most of the week. And we went to this beach. It was 100 degrees every day.
Yeah,
So there was nobody there.
right.
It was wonderful. we go soak in the water. Then we had our kites flying all the time. There was literally a mile of the most perfect sand beach where we were the only ones outside. And this also applied to the small towns nearby too. We went out to dinner, you know, there were locals. You know? my wife and a couple of her friends, went shopping, and there's a little town that they went to, which, and there's hardly anyone there. Now in July, everything would be swamped, or June.
Yeah.
Kids have also gone back to school. That's part of it. We go back to school earlier around here, 1st of August, well, or first
Wow.
weekend.
Wow.
And so, but there was that local feel. We felt like we were on our own. A lot of the houses, I mean, there are a lot of houses in there, but they were mostly empty. People didn't want to be there when it was so hot.
No. Yeah.
It was hot, but we were out all the time, mostly in the water
And playing, not working.
and playing.
Yeah, no, we're going to reorganize in a really interesting way. I just hope we can live long enough to do that reorganizing. That's my concern. And that will have to do with how well we learn to cool, because the cooling is going to be, and it's not just us. We're going to have to create canopy for every living thing so that there's a space to.
Well, there's some
time
very interesting
adjust.
things going around. One of them is this linear city that's being built in Saudi Arabia across the desert. It's about half a mile wide. It's maybe 20 stories tall, and it runs for 100 miles.
Huh.
That's the design of it. And it will be a completely self-contained system.
Where's the food?
It's grown in there.
So they're,
I guess the main question,
inside,
where's
indoors.
the water? But
Yeah.
The built, integral to this whole city is the fact of having vertical gardens, vertical farming. It's far out idea, and of course it's being canned. Who would want to live there? Well, if there's no other alternative, I'd like to live there. They've already done some very extensive planning of design work in Saudi Arabia, putting up reflective panels on the outside of the structure, like this will have, to reflect the heat away into the desert surrounding, to to have multi stories down. That their universities now are built on the principle that the streets are all shaded. They're walking streets, and they're not going to be cool, other than the fact that if the other temperature is 110, it'll maybe be 90 down there, 85. Right. Definitely doable without any air conditioning. You don't need air conditioning down at those levels.
Right.
And I know it's caught my attention because it shows.
Where did you find out about it?
Oh, YouTube.
Okay.
But they're actually videos showing, that the foundation work for the first 10 miles or so is being done right now.
Well,
and it's going to cost $1 trillion. But
the cities have money. They don't take anything of money. So.
They evidently have the money. So there are things that could be done. I mean, in other words, animals, at least the animals that humans husband, would be.
Well, see, the thing I wonder, and that I don't hear in that, and that's part of the conversation that I just am not hearing at all. We're still feeling like the planet is this rock that we're on, and we can do stuff on the rock, and there's no real relationship between the two because we're still living on the rock. And I've gotten so deep in the understanding of that interconnection, I don't see that as being viable for the long term. That in lots of ways, I feel that the biomes that are in us, all the critters that are in us, are also connected to the soil, and that's why it's good for our hands to be in dirt. Why we feel good when we're digging and in the garden and that kind of stuff. That symbiotic relationship has a chance to manifest. So when we take ourselves away from that, we can survive for a while, but it's not a long-term process, because that refreshing, that need to reconnect and to connect has to be there somehow. I'm even thinking that this fantasy of going to another planet is exactly that, a fantasy. We could go and we could live there for a little bit, but our race would deteriorate because we need dirt. We need the biomes that are here. And so we can't cut ourselves off from that. So that's why it's really a whole planet thing. Everybody has to live, not just us. We really, really, really have to keep life alive in these temperature zones that it's accustomed to long enough to adapt to the temperatures we're going to, because we're going in a different direction, and keep us alive and long enough to make that adaptation. Everybody, but we have to start with cooling so that there is time, because it takes a while to make those kinds of shifts and changes. I just, if we don't include the planet, everything we do is temporary. I just can't see how it's going to last over the long term.
Yeah, well, one thing about this design is that it can sustain incredibly dense population. So several thousand miles of this city could house billions of people. And the whole rest of the world, the planet, could be allowed to wild itself and keep the humans out.
Yeah. Yeah, that would, yeah.
Other than those who were willing to truly be to husband, the growth cycles,
right,
in a meaningful way, because many would, and those who don't want to do that or can't do it could be given an alternative. So that's also kind of a tongue-in-cheek observation that I immediately had when I looked at this. Yeah, we could just separate the humans out and the rest of the world, but the humans are here for a purpose. I totally believe, I feel it in my bones that we're here to do, to be a part of it, not to just separate ourselves out.
Yeah.
But maybe for a while we have to do that to part of the population.
Well, it's part of the learning. I mean, we've been so cavalier for so long, and now we're learning not to be cavalier, but what that means is still, I mean, there's just so much change. I have no idea what it would look like if we really were integrated and if we really cared enough to be part of it. So yeah, no, that I do agree that it could be a possibility. Again, it's a buying time process.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as if there aren't examples. I mean, there are plenty of examples of farms that have been able to produce an extraordinary interrelationship with the land. Forget the name of it, but those remarkable farms in the north in Scotland.
Findhorn?
Yeah, Findhorn.
Yeah.
And then, in Maine, there was that couple that, had some beautiful farms, and the farm down here in what is it, Alabama or Mississippi?
Yeah, Albert Bates.
the commune. I mean, there's some remarkable things that are actually
Yeah.
happening. And basically the mass media has made fun of them, and
Yeah. Oh, they're interesting oddities. Yeah.
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 or these bio units, or the out in Arizona where people enter for a year to live in a self-contained bio unit
Mm.
and go crazy in there.
Yeah,
But
they have earth ships too there. Yeah, I went through that when I was in my RV and took some photos of some of those places. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, some of them have been more successful than others, and you might say more pertinent to where we are now than others. But there's just been a lot. Well, this goes back to the originalism of people just experimenting and playing
Yeah. Yeah.
with the situation where they found themselves.
Yep.
For me, it was in Oregon, which was a very profusely propagating life, living, situation. Could grow almost anything. In fact, I had blackberries growing up through the wall in my house. So
I hope it was a kitchen so you could just pick it. Not the bedroom. Yeah.
So, I mean, there are plenty of examples.
Yeah.
What's not happening is the, anyone holding this up. The consumer mentality has definitely won out in terms of the mass media.
Well, I think that's part of the gift of the internet, though, is because when things happen in local places, it stays in local places.
Yeah.
You know what's happening around you, but you don't know what's happening 1,000 miles away. You don't have a clue. So the internet really surmounts that hurdle. You can really learn and share. And that's been its blessing and its curse at the same time. So I think there's a true desire to hang on to that. And like I said, I really hope we can, because it would be really useful. I mean, we're just going to have to be fewer people. And if we're fewer people, then what infrastructure can be maintained with fewer people is a question. Yeah. And I got hope in that regard. A friend of mine who's an architect, Carl Welty, said, well, Rome was one of the first really major cities. It had like 1 million or so people. And yet when Rome fell, that whole thing collapsed and there were 35,000 people living there. But live there they did. And the city's back, in terms of size and all of that. So there's some history of a few people being able to hold the fort without totally losing the infrastructure. So maybe that'll happen.
Mexico City is another example. It was quite a thriving metropolis, in the 1500s. Very different looking, of course.
Yeah.
And there was still a lake. It was still an island on the lake with, housing around it. And, it of course now is, maybe, if not the largest, certainly one of the largest in the world.
Yeah. With all sorts of problems.
Yeah, they're terrible.
Yeah.
I dare say there are many issues in Rome, current day Rome as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's going to be a big experiment. We'll see where it goes. Yeah, I have this friend I was telling you about is very much into righting the ship, fighting the battle against all of the horrible things we've done. And it's just like, well, that's good. I mean, there's lots of room. You can do whatever you like. And if you want to do it, I think you should, because that's a message that there's energy there to address that. but it is not a place I can play. So I cheer her on from the fringes. But I'm not willing to really directly engage. I don't see it as viable for me. It's draining for me. I get my juice from seeing things happen and come new things blooming and that kind of stuff. So that's where I want to play. So there's room for all of us.
Well, there's another aspect to this, and that is that I'm struck by the necessity for people to basically just get along, to understand
Yes.
that, in virtually every religion, there's the command to love one another. It's specifically stated that way in the Christian gospel, but it's really in every single religious text that's the basis from which we start. Does that mean that you have to like what people are doing? No, it's
or do the same thing. Yeah.
Do the same thing. No, I mean, like it in that sense that you want to replicate, that you want to be a part of a particular thing. But that is an issue. It's torn apart every communal living experiment that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
That eventually, people decide that they can't stand one another, or they can't stand the thought of what one is professing, that's not their own, and they're unwilling to give up, give way, and things get torn apart. And that's absolutely describes the current battle for governance on the national level and state level in this country. And it absolutely has to stop. There's no way that you can profess to love life, to love nature, to be in love with everyone, and yet fight tooth and nail and accuse.
I was in another conversation with some folks that were talking about the scale of life and ruminating about how we started out single cell, got into multi-celled and so on. And yet out of those multi-cells, we have this plethora of body shapes that are just astonishing. I mean, we're interesting, but if you go into the ocean, that's really interesting. You see body shapes there you would never imagine, even in the wildest. And in a sense, that's kind of what you're talking about too, because we're exploring our own life, our own experience in interacting with the things outside of us. And you kind of make choices. And there's a certain point where the choices kind of don't fit together.
Right.
And we don't have a lot of tolerance for that.
We don't know how to even deal with it.
Yeah. Oh, it's not like, oh, so
how to relate to it in a way where we're actually together. Yeah.
So I was thinking of those choices as different animal bodies, basically. Yeah. Somebody becomes an elephant and somebody else is a sloth, It's a totally different way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
And it's okay. It works. And not only does it work, it really helps support the whole, because that difference contributes in a unique way. And then I think about our own body and all the things that are there doing their thing have come together and agreed to do that. And to not do something else. I mean, there's something there. There's a wisdom there that we can really tap into, I think, to address this issue that you're bringing up, because that splitting is okay. We don't want it to be okay in some kind of way. It's a failure, or it's a demand, or we have all these other things we put on it instead of really accepting that difference. Kids and parents, same way, how kids can be so different from their parents. And sometimes it's accepted and sometimes it's not. You know, we do not handle that sense of difference and the need to be different very well.
What do you think of these children who, well, I'm sure they had a lot of adult help, but who actually took it to court? And what was it?
Oh, yeah.
In
In
Montana,
Montana.
was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was reading some of the sourpuss replies to this as people saying, well, you know, I mean, it was the judge was predisposed that way anyway. That's what we expected, and so forth and so on. And Montana, well, really doesn't have much of has an incredibly low footprint in terms of energy use anyway. So it's just sort of a silly thing to even worry about in this state. Blah blah blah. Went on and on, and what I'm most thrilled about by it was simply that the kids took it on.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's this young man, I don't know his first name, he sent an email out. It should be in here still. His name is Hogg. He was one of the young men at the Florida school that got shot up, 4 or 5
Right.
years.
Yeah. Yes. He's become quite a guy. Yeah.
And the way he's presenting his campaign is really wonderful. It says we need to be, all of us in the age group, we need to be represented. We need to be, and the only way we can do that is by running.
Right.
So he's offering assistance,
Yep.
Basically Black Lives Matter started out that way. And in fact, it may have always stayed that way, except for the fact that it was co-opted by the mass media and destroyed. But, David Hogg, I think his name is, but he's starting out with a sense that I think is very true, that work locally, but you can learn, at least the procedures, the processes, and gain understanding, from a much broader scale. So, I mean, that came in on text. Well, actually, he's very good. He texted me, but also sent an email. Good coverage. I guess he didn't know that I'm a geriatric here, But I can certainly support it in one way or another.
Yeah. No, I was thrilled with what he was doing too. Yeah, he's gotten to be quite the guy. Yeah, there's so much hope in so many ways. You just don't know how it's all going to come out and how it's all going to connect. Yeah, you just have to trust the process. Yeah.
Well, I'm also aware of the fact that there were certain people throughout our recent history, so we're able to see movies about them even, definitely learn about the process in very, close detail. Gandhi, I mean, there were movies, about him, Martin Luther King Jr. And then this movie, Oppenheimer.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen the new one?
Yeah, I did. And the thing is that he arrived like the other two, actually, at a time and place where it was very important for someone to tell it like it was. Yes, he brought the atomic age in, mm-hmm. And there was something very beautiful about that, and it could have been only useful as to benefit humanity and to, diminish the use of fossil fuels, which even back in the 50s, people were starting to understand that there might be an issue there. And he tried to stand his ground and wasn't, there was not enough support around him. And he was, pretty much, obliterated until he was not. Now he's being, feted, just like King. I mean, even up the spine of Alabama, there's a Martin Luther King Jr. highway. Goes to Birmingham. I mean, the irony is just dripping. I mean, this all comes under that same feeling in me, that really for human beings to really learn how to work together. And not in the sense of following one leader. In a sense, it's following your own leader, but being willing
right here
locally, but being willing to accept that what that other person's doing right next to you, which is so different, you're willing to work things out so that you can both work together in a sense, even if it's just by, being allowing of the other person to do what they're doing. And I think that everything falls, success. We talked about whether there will be success or not. I think it's going to be measured according to how well large groups of people start to realize that this is the answer. That this is the fact, we talk about the spiritual awakening. Well, this is the actual awakening, in fact, hand to mouth sort of action in my estimation anyway.
No, I think you're right. I think the cooperation between groups, I mean, that was the sort of the gift of the United States, is it was such an experiment in getting states to cooperate as a whole.
Yeah, it really
I mean, that was just such an amazing idea. It had never happened before at all.
They could all consider themselves independent states.
Yep. And so pulling that together and keeping it together for 200 years, and now everybody's trying to be independent again. That's part of the libertarian push. That's part of what the far right is doing, is trying to separate all the states and be independent so they can do their own thing. Because it's very much an I-centered focus. They don't understand the interdependence. It's necessary actually to keep them all going.
They have a half right, because just as you were saying, they should be working locally and doing it somewhat independently, but only if it's tempered by a knowledge of and an allowance for the whole view.
Yep. And an understanding that sometimes you have to give up yours so that everybody else can be okay. That you don't have the right to undermine that. We haven't got that one straight yet. Undermining seems like an option, and it's really not. It's false news.
Well, I must say it's pretty hot here. It must be hot where you are, because
it has been. Yeah, it's been in the hundreds. But I am really fortunate. It's 79 where I sit.
Oh, that's really.
So I don't mind it at all. I'm trying to see what the actual temperature is. Well, it says 82 outside. It's only going to be 89 today, so it's cool.
Let's see what this one is. I don't even know. Seems a little cold. Hot. It's 86. But this isn't air conditioned out here in my room out here, my office.
Oh,
So the rest of the house is at 74, but out here it's probably in 82.
yeah. Well, the air conditioning is on in the house, but it doesn't get here very well. So we're usually a little warmer, but it's fine. Yeah. Yeah, it's the consistency. You can do a day or two or three, but when it gets into the weeks or months, that's when it's really, really hard. That's when it just, there's no relenting. Was one of the things about India.
But I heard somebody in the other room, and there's not supposed to be anyone here.
Yeah, that was when I was in India. It was, I swear it went up to 135. That's what my memory says. And I mean, it was hot, but what was hard was that it goes down to 90 at night. So it doesn't ever seem like it cools off. And in India, it's not like you can go someplace and there's no ice, if you're not in the city. So it is pretty unrelenting in terms of that. And there's something about that space, because when you're in that kind of unrelenting heat, you can't keep up artifices very well. It just is too much work. So people pretty much get to where they are, who they are, because you just can't be anything else. It just takes too much effort to do that. And I think maybe that's why India was such a spiritual hotspot, because it really fosters that being more in touch with yourself than other places might. So that will be interesting to see, because that's going to be part of our new experience also. People.
Well, one thing will probably be eating more spicier food. Because my friend Ranjan from college days was from Calcutta.
Yeah.
And he used to make the hottest food. It was just totally rip your tongue apart. And so we would talk about that. And he thought about it. He was a physicist. He thought about it and thought about it. And he finally said, I'm pretty sure, to my mind, the main purpose of the hot spices is to stimulate your taste buds, stimulate the saliva so that you actually want to eat.
Huh.
Otherwise, I would not want to eat. There would be no reason to, and you have to eat. It's
right. Interesting.
More, and so he convinced me anyway that was the purpose of it. What he never convinced me of is that I should sit down and eat one of his trout. Ranjan, on a scale of 1 to 10, come on, how hot is that? Oh, maybe a 6. This is killing me.
Yeah. I don't find hot pleasant. The Thai food, I can appreciate more, because it's not just hot, it's flavor. Each of those spices is intense, but it's a flavor. Yeah. And so there's more nuance than just hot. And that was different. But yeah, hot, I'm not a great fan of either. Yeah. But interesting insight. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to head out and do some things.
Okay.
Afternoon. Right. Wish you well in writing or finding.
Yep. No, I've got the text, so I just got to do it. I gotta have a I'll put up a 10-minute video shortly.
Good. Very good. I'm sorry we missed Ani today, but
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard from her, so I don't know. I didn't see an email from her, so I don't know. Something must have happened.
she's doing fine and just had something come up.
Yep, I'm
All
sure.
right. Take care.
Okay, so good to see you.
See you next week, I would think.
Yep. Okay. Bye.